Hello and welcome back to another GiantSlayerTV Top 10 video. Today I'll be going over the top 10 items for patch 1124. With a few patches under our belt, it's a good time to get a firm idea on what items are doing the best in the meta. We'll be taking a look at the top carry, utility, and defensive items with a few honorable mentions tossed in at the end. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Starting off our top 10, we have Hand of Justice coming in at number 10. The quintessential build this item for any champion is, of course, Hand of Justice. It's the GOAT when it comes to flexible play because it's a slammable early item and playable practically on any carry later on. That said, Hodge hasn't had much of a presence in set 6 due to the reliance on playing best in slot items on carries. Flexible play is still valuable, but sometimes having the perfect item is more important than slamming an item like Hand of Justice early on. Despite that issue, Hodge is still used quite frequently because it has a bit of damage, extra starting mana, and healing does pair well with the majority of the champions in set 6. Katarina was a huge reason for this item shooting up in priority last patch, so it's naturally we'll likely see it dip down in value since Kat has been nerfed in 1124. But there's still other champions that can use it effectively, such as Akali, Kai'Sa, Jinx, and Kog'Maw. All in all, we still recommend using Hand of Justice if you're looking to play flexibly and have the components to make it early on in the game. Moving on to number 9 item on the list, we have Hextech Gunblade. That's right, Gunblade is actually useful. In previous sets, the item was generally considered quite weak. There were certainly times where it was valuable, but it wasn't until set 5 with the Radiant items that the potential of Gunblade was showcased to provide healing to more than just the item holder. And that's where Gunblade shines the brightest in set 6, partially as a means to heal the item holder, but also to provide additional utility. Especially since a big theme for set 6 is healing, as a lot of champions and synergies can heal or shield. Gunblade is still a bit niche since not every champion will use it well, but there are a few that use it extremely well, such as Malzahar, Heimerdinger, and Orianna. Due to it being somewhat niche, we're keeping it high on the list, but don't let that fool you. In the right situation, Gunblade can be the determining factor between winning a round and losing it. Just keep in mind that, for the most part, other items should be higher in priority before committing your components to Gunblade. Up next is Ionic Spark as the number 8 item. First off, we do need to acknowledge that Ionic Spark was nerfed in 1124. This has changed how we value this item because previously, when Katarina was jumping around dominating the meta, Ionic Spark would have been in our top 5 for sure. But post-nerf, it's still a bit too early to tell exactly where Ionic Spark is going to end up in the meta, so to be safe, we're placing it a bit higher on the list. Of course, it is worth pointing out that the nerf was to the zap damage and not the magic resist debuff. That means it's still going to be good for compositions that deal mainly magic damage, though Arcanists are a bit up in the air after Vex was essentially removed from the meta entirely. Which champions should Ionic be prioritized in that case? Well, Katarina is probably a no-go unless proven to still be effective, so players need to consider other options like Akali. Akali is much better now after small buffs, but more importantly, the targeting bug being fixed, meaning units won't randomly turn on Akali and burst her down. Colossus seems to be doing well with buffs to all 3 champions, so Ionic goes up in value for those units. Kog'Maw and Protectors are still doing well, meaning Ionic on Garen or Kassadin to help Kog'Maw deal additional damage can be worthwhile. At the end of the day, we do recommend trying out Ionic, but it is important to be aware of the nerfs it received, meaning it may not be as effective as it was in the current meta. Moving on, we have Runan's Hurricane coming in at number 7. Good old reliable Runan's takes the number 7 spot, mainly because it's still one of the best items for Yone, and so far, Yone is still doing well in the meta. There's plenty of other champions that can effectively use Runan's, but it's really because of Yone that it has any major presence in the meta. As to why it's so good on Yone is to help with 2 things. 1, dealing damage to additional champions mean Yone is spreading his damage across multiple units with his base attacks and the clone of his ability. 2, it does critically strike, which either pairs well with Infinity Edge or Last Whisper, both of which are commonly considered the best 2 damage items for Yone. And the third reason is that the bow component does increase attack speed, albeit by not too much, but for a challenger champion that does mean a higher base attack speed to scale with. The reasons for it being good on Yone do apply to other champions that can use it. The downside for Runan's is that it no longer applies on hit effects, which is probably a good thing. Imagine Talon being able to spread multiple bleeds per auto attack. That's scary. Next up is an item that received a minor rework. That item is Blue Buff, which comes in at number 6 on today's list. It's not so much a rework as it is just a buff, but Blue Buff now provides an additional 20 starting mana on top of the mana it already provides with double tiers. That basically means any champion that has a Blue Buff is going to cast quite quickly. Mostly this affects mid-range mana pool champions, but is still helpful for high mana units like Orianna. The best part about this rework is the fact that it opens up the item to being used by multiple champions instead of being rather niche like before. With that in mind, players can make an actual decision between building a blue buff or Shojin. You want that initial cast of an ability to come much faster? Go with blue buff. If you want more consistent cast throughout a fight, Shojin it is. While this is a far cry away from the initial tease of the change to blue buff, it still helped put it back on the item meta map. In the middle of the pack, we have 2 items jointly taking the number 5 spot, Sunfire Cape and Morellonomicon. The reason these 2 items are together is for one key reason: they provide healing reduction. Perhaps you've noticed in set 6 that there's a lot of healing, like a lot. Not only from champions or traits, but also augments, as several of them provide additional healing in one way or another. That means having healing reduction can often be the key to winning, and the items that provide this are, of course, Sunfire and Morellonomicon. Both of them have different applications though. Sunfire is a frontline item, and Morello's is a relatively niche AP item for specific champions. Of the two, Sunfire is certainly easier to fit into your comp. But the point is, you want one or the other in basically every game. There is a Sunfire augment, which is definitely worth taking if you have no healing reduction, but the items are a bit more consistent, plus it lets you take a different augment. All in all, you may not need healing reduction every game, but having it will never be a detriment to your board. Now we're into our top 4, which consists of meta favorite items, starting with the number 4 item, Rageblade. Lots of champions scale incredibly well with attack speed in set 6. Challenger champions may not need it, but plenty of non-challengers or compositions that aren't running multiple challengers makes Rageblade a top-tier item. Kog'Maw, for example, is going to scale like crazy in a fight with Rageblade, especially with certain mutations and Twin Shot. We won't spend any more time on Rageblade because, let's be honest, everyone knows the value of this item by now and what it does. It's good, we recommend it, build it. Next up is Shroud of Stillness as the number 3 item. Shroud is by far the best utility item in the game. Zephyr can be great and Banshee's Claw is useful, but Shroud is a game changer. Main reason is that in set 6, there's a lot of champions with high mana pools. Shroud will make it so those champions barely are able to cast once per fight, and that cast will be heavily delayed. And in general, Shroud is just useful at slowing down the pace of a fight. This is especially good for any composition that needs time to scale, like Kog'Maw Protectors or Innovators. Shroud may not be effective against every composition, but in general, you will get a ton of value. Coming in at number 2 is an item that really doesn't need any introduction, Infinity Edge. Why does it feel like Infinity Edge has become the staple damage item for, well, every carry champion? Because it has! And the reason for that, besides the fact that it's a good item, is that there aren't really a lot of other valuable items anymore for carries. Take, for example, AD champions. What other damage items do you really want on them? Giant Slayer can be useful, but was nerfed and doesn't always provide enough damage. Hand of Justice is less overall raw damage and more for utility. Last Whisper, well, that's an item you want paired with Infinity Edge. Then there's Deathblade, which, after the changes to it in set 6, is basically not an item anymore. This leaves us with Infinity Edge. Granted, it is ineffective against Bramble Vest, but on average, the damage increase it provides is better than doing reduced damage against one champion, so while Bramble is annoying, it doesn't completely nullify the value of Infinity Edge. Point being is if you need more damage, aim for Infinity Edge. Even on AP champions, it's the best when paired with Jeweled Gauntlet because Deathcap and Archangels aren't that amazing by comparison. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Bramble Vest. Considering Infinity Edge is number 2 on the list and we mentioned how Bramble Vest counters it, having Bramble in first place shouldn't be too surprising. The item is everywhere in the meta as it's hands down the best frontline item in the game. Much like Infinity Edge, it is an essential item to make every single game. Playing against Assassins? Build Bramble. See any Infinity Edge in the game? Bramble. Want your tank to be more tanky? Bramble. There's really no reason to not build Bramble, given how set 6 has played out so far. With that, we've reached the end of our top 10 items for patch 11.24. But before we go, we've got a few honorable mentions to talk about. Our first honorable mention is Frozen Heart. We want to mention this item because it was buffed quite a bit in the patch. The attack speed slow went from 25% to 35%, which is a crazy increase. The main reason we're unsure this item is top 10 worthy is that it's too early to tell the value it'll have in the meta. Which champions can use it effectively? Does the attack speed slow matter as much? These are all questions that will naturally be answered over the course of the patch, but for now, we're just going to acknowledge the buff and recommend trying it out. The second honorable mention is Last Whisper, primarily because it pairs well with Infinity Edge. The main issue with Last Whisper is that not every champion will use it effectively, and really it's only played on a few champions. It's not a necessity and only a few units want it. We don't want to overinflate its value by having it in our top 10. Definitely a solid item, but not one that you always need. And the final honorable mention is emblems. Emblems have become a fairly important part of the meta when players are either able to build them or find them. Augments obviously play more of a role in this because finding a spatula can be difficult, but in general, emblems are quite useful in the meta. That said, they can be niche, and finding exactly the one you want may be difficult, especially if it's tied to an augment. At the end of the day, you can get by without utilizing emblems, but for anyone looking to augment their gameplay, emblems are a good way to do that. Alright, that's all we have for you for today, folks. Items in set 6 have thus far been a bit underwhelming in terms of flexibility. Most of the time, there's a clear-cut best-in-slot item for every champion, and deviating from that is a surefire way to lose. Thankfully, augments do add a lot of diversity so the items don't feel stale from game to game. Let us know in the comment section below what items you're having the most success with. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.